So my session today is about getting you up to speed with some basic ideas of loudness and loudness measurement. I mean, loudness is, of course, as you know, the topic of all those 2 days. So I'm here to, talk to you about what is it about this ITU standard and what did we do in the EBU. But we're talking loudness today, and actually I chose the title Loudness Zen, the way to reach audio nirvana, because the Zen concept has a lot of good merits. It basically consists of simplicity and restraint and naturalness. So the Zen idea of simplicity and restraint and naturalness is something that we also strove for in our loudness work in EBU. And for the first time, actually, I'm happy to introduce here with me together a partner and a co-host. So I've never done that before, but here is my co-host for today. Yeah, he's a little bit grumpy at times, and by pure coincidence, his name is Silvio, but that's just pure coincidence, And he should be there to keep me on track when I get too excited and too enthusiastic, because he's a grumpy guy and he doesn't like stress at all, So he should be really keeping me back on the ground. So Silvio will accompany me here and us on the session, and we will ask his opinion at times too. Anyway, let's get started with our way to loudness nirvana, And the concept of nirvana, for instance, is something that Silvio knows very well, He has been there, But it can be not fun, but in any case, you see him in the state of nirvana, he's just being reborn again. Anyway, so he knows that very well, so that's why I have him here on the session. All right. Let's just examine a few whys and whats and these kind of things. So what's our problem? You all know what's our problem. So we have this we still have this concept of peak normalization. So we have one, reference, which is up here, the peaks. And we have all these nasty loudness jumps, especially in broadcasting, as you know. We have loudness jumps when the first commercial comes in. We have another loudness jump when the next low-level documentary comes in. And we have the third loudness jump when the next commercial comes in, or the promo. You all know the problem. And the concept of peak normalization is one of the reasons for that. We'll come back to that later. So loudness jumps all over the place. And if you look at an average living room of today and count the number of remote controls, that are lying on the desk, it's 11 remote controls here, and 7 of those, in that special case, which is a friend in Norway, have volume controls on it, or gain controls, as we say, And they are the most used buttons, of course, on these remote controls. So wouldn't it be nice to get rid of them, or at least to eliminate a couple of them, or at least not use them as much anymore? That's the goal. So we do have a loudness problem, a severe loudness problem. Hopefully not as severe as for this guy, but at least we have a loudness problem. Just very briefly also, you know all that. But what is loudness in general? And that's actually very important to grasp, that it has to do with, or it is, a subjective impression. And that makes it really complicated, because in the broadcast world, or as audio engineers, we need a box tool. We need gear to objectively measure loudness. And so it's basically impossible to construct a box that gives you a perfect representation of your subjective impression. And Bob has elaborated yesterday that preferred loudness is something that is very difficult to grasp, because the preferred loudness for any piece of audio could be very different for you, or for you, or for you, dependent whether you like it, dependent on your age, dependent on your mood, dependent how much vino rosso you had the last night, etc. So there's a lot of parameters that influence your perception of loudness. So it has to do with perception, and so it's impossible to construct a perfect objective box to measure loudness. So we have to, abandon this goal that we want a perfect box to replicate our subjective sensation. So the only thing we can have is something that is good enough. And fortunately, we have that. That's a good thing. But we have to abandon the concept there's never going to be such a thing as a perfect loudness meter. it's impossible. Okay. So perception is the thing. So it has to do with our ears, and especially with a kind of gray mass in between our ears. Yeah, that's what it's all about. And as this is the most complicated organ ever, you know, it's one of the reasons why we cannot construct a perfect loudness meter. Anyway, let's make a very brief check about loudness, about our perception of loudness. And I'm going to play to you two sounds, pairs of sounds, and you can check for yourself which one is louder than the other one. Yeah, and we talk about it a little bit. So I'm going to play you these sounds, and we talk about it a little bit. I'm playing them twice, so they have an idea. And we have to be quite, you know, very quiet because they're very low in level. So let's start, and you can tell what is louder afterwards. Again. So, what was louder? Or equally loud, or whatever, one or two? Equally, George. Two was louder. Two louder, two equally, yeah. Equal, yeah, okay. Okay. Well, it was meant to be almost equally loud from the perception. And now you're all audio engineers, so you can tell me what is the electrical level of those two? Second one bigger. Yeah. How much? 6 dB. 18 dB. 8 dB. 20 dB. The second one is 20 dB higher in electrical level. So that brings us to the equal loudness contours, as you know. So that's about a 40 phone stuff, what you're playing here. So we have the first band is 1.5K to 3K. It's the octave from 1.5K to 3K, so exactly in that region where we are most sensitive. And the second octave is 50 to 100 hertz. So that's about the 20 dB in level difference, but that gives you the same perception. You know? So that's one thing. Our hearing is very non-linear, and as you know from these curves too, the non-linearity changes with our listening level a lot. And the loudness box can also not anticipate it, because the loudness box does not know what our listening level is. So that's complicating it even further. I have another example for you to judge. Again. Okay, which one was louder? Same, softer? First one was louder. Other opinions? Second one? Same? It's about the same again, yeah? But you see, there is a different perception already now, dependent on what? Peak level, yeah, of course. So what is the difference in peak level between the two? What do you think? First one more, first one higher? How much? Same? 10 dB, yeah, that's exactly right. The first has 10 dB higher peak levels, because it's these really high transients of the hooves on the concrete. The second one is compressed music. So the peak level difference is now 10 dB. Perception again the same, but peak level difference 10 dB. So if both of them are normalized according to their peaks, the second one is 10 dB louder, of course. So that's another thing, you know. These things are very related also to peak level, peak perception, transients, also to things. So, yeah, it's a complicated matter. That's basically what I want to illustrate here with those two short examples. You know, it's not really easy to construct a box that mimics how we perceive things, loudness-wise and peak level-wise. All right. So when anybody set out to really fundamentally change the way we treat things, you know, usually these kind of very big changes start with somebody having a dream. And there are very good examples of that out in history, and the most prominent one, of course, or one of the most prominent ones, is Martin Luther King with his famous speech, "I have a dream." And he actually changed his world. You know, he changed the world of the black community in the States and probably also in the world in the end. There are other peoples who have dreams and want to, you know, kind of spark changes that are maybe not as political as this one. And one of them is Lenny Kravitz, you know, who thinks it's time for a love revolution. And for loudness and for audio, of course, we need an audio leveling revolution. It's not as sexy as a love revolution, obviously, but we need a leveling revolution. And, well, that's probably the first time why I need Silvio bringing me back here, because he hates revolutions, you know. But actually, when we started our work in P-Loud, or in the European group to do that, we had nothing else but the very humble goal to change the world. And I think it's a very good motivation for any work you do. Let's change the world today. Even if it's only the small world around you, but in that case, our world is quite large, because we want to fundamentally change the way we treat our basic audio signals. The way we actually really treat our signals, which we work on every day. So let's change the world for a change, yeah? Anyway, why do we have the problem in the first place? And we have elaborated on that yesterday quite a lot. So we have this one also very objective reason that louder is better. And in, you know, Bob Katz has told us yesterday that even 0.2 of a dB changed his perception of the quality of an audio signal significantly. So louder is better. But we, of course, know it from producers. Crank it up, push it, it's better. You know? So we know all that in broadcasting too. And the other reason, which we also talked about yesterday and all these days, is that we are metering peaks and measuring peaks and aligning according to the peaks. You know that. So that's the two fundamental reasons why we have this loudness problem also in broadcasting. It's in a different flavor as in the music industry, you know. It's a different flavor, but we have it. We have loudness jumps all over the place because of compressed commercials, because of dynamic, you know, documentaries and feature films, so we have a loudness problem. And one of the complicated issues here is that we are not even measuring the peaks in a true sense. So let's take the comparison with the iceberg. So we are not measuring the peak, but we are measuring something below the peak. No? We'll come to that in a second. And that has nothing to do with loudness whatsoever, because to stick with this comparison, the loudness level would be probably the center of gravity of this iceberg. And we don't even see it because it's hidden below the surface. So the loudness level would be the center of gravity, which is somewhere here, you know? So it doesn't have anything to do with the peak level. So we're actually measuring kind of hills, not peaks, you know? And that's, you know, kind of the illustration with a picture of the measurement device that we have, which is called a QPPM here in Europe, which, as you know, stands for quasi-peak program meter. So we're not actually measuring the real peaks, but we're measuring quasi-peaks. And as you know, the quasi stands for this reaction time of the meter, which is 10 milliseconds. So these short transients of the hooves that we heard will not get displayed correctly on a QPPM, because at the time it takes this QPPM to show the level, these transients are long gone. So really short transients get not displayed correctly on a QPPM. So in order for them to be transmitted still, we need a concept called headroom. And that has been working very well in broadcasting. There is a certain headroom where all these transients can be transmitted that we don't see on the meter, but that are there and that basically are responsible for the openness and transparency of the sound. So if we cut them off, we lose a little bit, you know, of audio quality. People obviously were not really afraid to do that, or they didn't care about that, because you know, peak limiting is all over the place. But in the old days, you should say, you know, in the analog days where we transmitted in broadcasting via frequency modulated carriers, there was this concept of headroom, that those transients could be, you know, transmitted. That was okay. Yeah, that was pretty okay. But when the loudness war began also to reach broadcasting, this headroom was kind of, you know, diminished and going away. Because we have more and more sophisticated weaponry to squash our signals without introducing, you know, major new artifacts. But now the situation is like this, that the headroom is basically gone. There's no headroom anymore, and everything is pushed up, also in broadcasting, at least for genres like commercials or promos or trailers. Yeah. So we're still in the middle of the trenches. We are still, fighting these things. And Sylvie, do you have a comment? Okay, yeah, war sucks, I know that, and you're hungry, I know that too. So I'll promise you, you will get a fly, but you have to wait until the end of the presentation. Then I'll give you the fly, no problem. All right, just a very quick animation to illustrate that concept of peak versus loudness normalization once more. Just to give you a very good grasp on that. So we still have this kind of reference peak level in broadcasting. Yeah, that's our reference. And all those tools now should represent individual programs. Yeah, and the size of the tool, so to speak, represents the dynamic range of things. So they are all aligned according to their peaks. So the sword here might be a highly dynamic action film, and this one might be a highly compressed commercial. So if we look at the loudness level of these programs, that would be the center of gravity. So as you know, TC Electronic called the loudness level center of gravity. Yeah, so that is a very good comparison. If we draw that in, that would be these green circles. You see the problem that we have. So if we connect the dots, you see all those loudness jumps that we have today. So huge jumps between dynamic material and highly compressed material. So what did we do in broadcasting, or what do? We compress. Yeah. So we compressed, not the hell out of it, but this is exaggerated, but we compressed because obviously the situation before was not satisfactory, because these huge jumps were just too much. So now we have the same peak level, but in this case we also have the same loudness level. So yeah, great, problem solved. But we sacrifice, of course, a lot, because we sacrifice all the nice dynamic range, for instance, of this feature film. So now with the Sylvester Stallone movie, the dialogue is as loud as the gun battle, which maybe would be okay for a Sylvester Stallone movie, but maybe not for other movies, So we sacrifice all the nice dynamics on the altar of this kind of compression loudness normalization. So compression is one solution, but it's not the good solution. Of course, the real solution is loudness normalization. So you can probably imagine what is happening in our case here with these dynamic programs. We get rid of this reference at the top. We get rid of a peak reference. We introduce a new loudness reference level. And now we align every program with its average loudness level to this new loudness reference. That's the idea. That's the concept of loudness normalization. And that's our audio nirvana, where we want to go to. So that's what we want to achieve. Yeah, that's the goal. You may ask yourself, why is it only now? It's 2011. The problem exists since decades. Why is it only now that we really go into that and really get forward with it? And one of the reasons is that before 2006, there was no international standard how you measure loudness. And as we know now, it's not easy to find a measurement that reflects our subjective impression. And fortunately, it was in the mid-2000 years, there was light at the end of the tunnel, so that we now do have a measurement for that. And you've, of course, seen and read the figure. It's done by the ITU, the International Telecommunications Union in Geneva, this standard 1770, or recommendation. The R stands for the Radio Communication Division, and BS stands for Broadcast Service Sound. So that's what it stands for, and 1770 is just a number. And now in the loudness community, we just talk about 1770, and we mean that's the kind of algorithm that has been standardized worldwide, internationally. How do you measure loudness? And the interesting thing about 1770 is that it is dead easy. It's a really easy algorithm, and at the heart of 1770 is just a simple frequency weighting curve. So you would argue that because there were a lot of submissions to the testing procedure with highly sophisticated psychoacoustic models for loudness, and actually this very simple weighting filter outperformed all the others, almost. Was at least on a par, but almost outperformed all the other highly sophisticated algorithms. Yeah. So of course, that's fantastic for a manufacturer because it's super easy to implement and super easy to construct. It's a kind of, high-pass filter, almost like a B curve. You know, the B weighting, there's A weighting, B weighting, C weighting, all those weighting curves to kind of mimic our sensitivity of hearing at different levels. We use that for measuring self-noise of microphones. Of course, we use it for calibrating a cinema system with C weighting, for instance. And this is almost like the B weighting curve, but it's a little bit modified in the cutoff frequency. And then we have an additional shelving filter, and that's it. And the ITU gave a name also to that weighting curve, and they chose the first letter that they thought didn't have any special meaning, and that was the letter K. So they call it K weighting. And here now we all know that we are probably not super happy about the K, because we have that system from Bob Katz, the K system, which is related to loudness, different calibrated listening levels to force you to mix more or less dynamically. So I would have liked to have a different letter here, but the ITU obviously was not aware of the K system of Bob, so they called it K weighting. It is not related to Bob, it's just one letter. Anyway, K weighting is this weighting curve which is at the heart of the 1770 process and algorithm. And just briefly, that's how it looks. We have this pre-filter, that's the shelving filter. Then we have the low cut or the high pass filter. Here the RLB stands for revised low frequency B curve. So the B curve revised in the low frequency range, but you can forget that. This whole block is the K weighting filter. Then we have an energy measurement, so a mean square measurement. And then, that's also interesting, we have a gain factor for the surround channels. That's a 5-channel signal here. So we come back to that later. Afterwards, everything is summed. We have an integrator, a log here, so that we get a number here for program loudness that basically is similar to a dB. It's a logarithmic value. This 1.5 dB of gain for the surrounds is interesting. It has its roots in our evolution. So we perceive sounds from the back, direct sounds from the back, as louder compared to sounds from the front with the same level. And the reason for that is that our ears are at the front and not at the back or at the sides. So everything that is direct sound from the back really, demands a lot of attention from us. Because it could be, in the past, as cavemen, that the saber-toothed tiger was behind us trying to kill us, and it was just stepping on a twig, and we had to be very aware of that, what was happening behind us. So Andrew Mason from BBC, also very active member in P-Loud, called it the tiger defense gene that is responsible for this plus 1.5 dB. It has been under debate a lot whether this is the right value or whether we should use it at all, this kind of gain, but that's how it is for the time being in 1770. So that's the algorithm, that's standardized, and that's great. And so after this came out in 2006, the loudness work internationally really got a big boost. So that's the reason why it's happening only now, and not 10 or 20 years ago, where already also people were, promoting loudness compared to peak normalization, but the time was not ripe, there was no international standard, etc., etc. Yep. So now we also have new units or new loudness measures, new loudness units. And we need a relative one that is called LU, loudness units. Yeah. We need a relative one to say, for instance, your program is 3 LU louder than your program. And of course, it has to be related to a dB. So a step of 1 LU is a step of 1 dB. It's exactly the same. So if you raise the electrical level by 1 dB, the loudness is raised by 1 LU. But with LU, we indicate, okay, we are talking about loudness here. And of course, there's a kind of relationship to VU, volume unit, and now we have loudness unit, loudness units. But then, of course, we also need an absolute measure to a certain reference. And of course, in these days of digital, we have the reference 0 dBFS, so full scale. So quite logically, we call the absolute unit loudness units reference to full scale, LUFS. So that's very logical. And note that it's not dBLU or dBLUFS. It's just LU and LUFS. So my program is 3 LU too loud. Your program has a loudness level of minus 21 LUFS, not dB LUFS. Yeah, don't confuse that. So LUFS is basically our new unit we are talking about, and in the English language it's very nice because you can pronounce it loves, you know. And we have talked to a couple of people, especially, you know, for instance, to the Beatles, and they're gonna change two of their songs, you know, to All You Need Is Loves and She Loves You. And also Lenny Kravitz is doing that. You know, we've also spoken to Lenny Kravitz, so it's time for a loves revolution. Another love revolution. So what do you think, Silvio? Yeah, good stuff. Yeah, that's what he likes. Anyway, a loudness level would be indicated today like that, or in the future. The loudness level with K weighting, and that's where the K belongs, you know, on the left side of the equation as a subscript, because in ITU they still call it LKFS, which is a mixture of things: loudness, K weighting, full scale. It's something that is not, you know, scientifically correct as far as naming conventions is concerned, but for you it's important to know LKFS and LUFS, it's all the same. So you don't have to care whether it's LKFS or LUFS. In the EBU or in Europe, we try to find a logical and scientifically correct name for the unit. Loudness units reference to full scale. So that's the only difference between those. And if the ITU or the Americans won't change to LUFS, so be it. Yeah. But you know now LKFS and LUFS is one and the same thing. So this would be it. LK is, for instance, minus 3.8 LUFS. And that's the average level of the Metallica CD. Yeah? So that's the record holder. You know? Minus 3.8 is really loud, as Thomas has demonstrated also yesterday. Nevertheless, peaks are still important. It's still important to measure the peaks. And that's where, again, 1770 comes into play. Because 1770 not only recommends the algorithm how to measure loudness, but it also recommends a new way to measure peaks. So getting rid of the QPPM and actually measuring the true peaks of a signal. And if we go back to the comparison with the iceberg, we really want to measure this very peak up here, because we need it for electrical reasons, not to distort our signal chain. So 1770 also recommends an algorithm how to measure a true peak with an oversampling true peak meter. And I think Thomas certainly has elaborated on true peak metering and this oversampling aspect yesterday in the morning. Yeah, so you know all that. So it's also a vital part of 1770, true peak metering. Yeah. So now, the EBU has built upon that 1770 algorithm. We would be fools not to take this as our basis. So that's also the fundamental basis for our work we did in addition to 1770. Yeah? So we have the tools, and our most important one is our recommendation R128. You know that by now. So let's just remain a few minutes with R128. What is it in essence? It's a very short and precise and simple document. You read it in 10 minutes basically, or 5 minutes. It's just 2 pages and that's it. So we basically define 3 audio parameters. 3, not 1, 3 audio parameters that shall characterize an audio signal with all its relevant, you know, characteristics. So we have one which is program loudness. That's arguably the most important one. That is that one number that indicates how loud is your program on average. And with program we mean that can be a 10-second commercial, it can be a half an hour game show, it can be a 2-hour feature film, whatever. One self-contained item is a program. And if we measure from start to stop of this program the average integrated loudness, that's what we call program loudness. That's one number, and that's the number that is used to normalize, to balance to the next program. So that's the idea. Then we know that now the maximum true peak level, which we define. We have a new maximum peak level, measured with a true peak meter now. And then, and that's the third one, we have loudness range. And I have touched on it yesterday too, and you probably all know that too. Loudness range indicates the difference between the average soft and the average loud parts of a program. So with these 3 parameters, we now know how loud the audio signal is, we know what the true peak level is, and we know how dynamic it is. And with a Q ppm, we didn't know any of those. We didn't know how loud, what the true peak level was, and how dynamic it was. We didn't know that. With these three, we now know it. So I think that's a breakthrough. We really can characterize an audio signal now. Yeah, that's one of the, I think, one of the main messages also in this work that we did in EBU. We have now 3 parameters that really characterize your audio signal. Yeah. Then we of course also defined that new reference. What is the magic number now for that loudness level? And you certainly have heard that this reference is -23 LUFS. And I could talk now about 10-15 minutes why it's 23 and not 22, 24, whatever. Just take it for granted. There was a lot of discussion going on here, and 23 was our magic number, and that worked very nicely across different platforms, genres, and Richard van Everdingen will talk about that in the distribution side, and also in his work, 23 fit very well. So there's a couple of good reasons why we chose 23. So you could argue that 23 is the new center of our audio universe, so to speak. Yeah, it's not -90 BFS or whatever or 0. It's -23 LUFS. That's the reference for the future. In Europe, how loud are we currently in Europe? So we measured all sorts of TV and radio stations and averaged all their average levels. So the average level in Europe is around -20 LUFS. Yeah? So we're not too far away from -23, but one consequence is already that we're gonna be softer in the future. Yeah? Those that are higher than 23 will be softer. There are of course also other ones who are lower than -23. A couple of radio stations are there. Yeah? They will be higher then in the future. But most or many broadcasters will be softer a little bit. But not too much, not too much. 3 dB, 3 LU, I think is quite tolerable on the edge. But it's also one of the reasons why we didn't go further down than 23, because if you would have to change, perceptually, I have to change maybe 6 dB down. That's a tough thing for an audio engineer. Although there are many strategies how you can do that, with just adjusting your monitor gain accordingly. Yeah. But 23, I think, is also a good number in that respect. Anyway, Europe is around that level. It will be 3 dB lower in Europe in the future. That's how it is. People will have to adjust on their remote control once, and that's it. Yeah. In addition to defining this one number, we also have something called a gating function. Yeah? So a gating method. What is that? Bob talked about the gate, and he showed measurements with gate and without the gate, and we have a kind of idea of that, but I want to illustrate that also with a animation a little bit. With the gate in place for the integrated measurement, we measure something called the foreground loudness. So the loudness of foreground signals like dialogue, prominent music, prominent sound effects, and ignore the low-level background sounds. And why is that important? You will see it in a second. Let's consider an audio signal that looks like that. That could be a talk show, whatever, with reasonably low dynamic range or loudness range. People are talking, but there's not too much going on dynamic-wise. And if we measure the average loudness of such a program, it would be that, kind of the middle line where there's half of it above and half of it below, plus or minus. In that case, it would be already -23, so that's already a loudness normalized talk show. And then we have another program that would look like that. That could be an action film, that could be a game of golf, where it's very quiet at times and suddenly there's a big applause or whatever. Or here is a gunshot or stuff like that. So a much more dynamic program. So if we measure the average loudness of this program, we get something like that. So the low parts bring it down, the high parts bring it up. So on average, we have this kind of average loudness level. So now we perform the loudness normalization. So we have to bring up this program to the same average loudness as the talk show. But now we have a problem, because we have a perceived difference in loudness, because we take these foreground sounds, the loud parts, as our reference to judge loudness. So these ones here. So we have a perceived loudness difference. So if we measure it just as it is, dynamic material appears to be too loud after normalization. And actually it was Alessandro here, from Fox, that pointed us to this fact with one of the movies you've probably seen, No Country for Old Men, which is highly dynamic, and ended up being way too loud after loudness normalization, because all those low-level sounds bring the average level down, and if you then loudness normalize it to the other things, the foreground sounds are just way too loud. So the solution would be, let's go back to the beginning, if we found a way only to measure those foreground sounds, gating out in the measurement the low-level parts, then the loudness difference goes away. That's the idea of the gate, to improve the loudness matching, loudness balance of highly dynamic material. That's the idea. Yeah. And our solution for the gating was a relative threshold of 8 LU below the ungated one. So it kind of moves with the integrated measurement. And we submitted that to the ITU even. Yeah? We very fancily called it the gate, G8, the gate. Very nice. But it turned out that the ITU liked the idea, but didn't like the 8 LU gate. So there was a lot of discussion going on whether it would be too high of a gate threshold and these kind of things. So in the end, we had to abandon that nice G8 thing, and gate thing, and had to settle on a 10 LU gate below the non-gated one. And we couldn't be happier, I have to say, in the EBU. It's very similar to 8 LU, the 8 LU gate. So we are super happy with that solution. And of course, we'll change R128 and all our relevant documents to a 10 gate, minus 10 gate. That's clear. So the 10 gate is now officially already in ITU 1770. That was a big champagne party. It was not really a champagne party. But once the gate came into ITU, that was exactly what we intended, because we didn't want to have the gate as a proprietary EBU solution. Yeah? It really belongs into the international algorithm, and that's the case since middle of March. So the gate is in ITU 1770. So gate is there. It's in 1770. Fine. Great. Wonderful. We have a second gate. Yeah. That's an absolute gate of minus 70 LUFS. That's always there to get rid of, spurious noises or whatever background noise. And it's also there, very handy, to start the loudness measurement when the audio starts, and not because there is some low-level noise going on. So you can actually run your workstation or whatever, and when the audio begins, the loudness measurement starts, because before, the absolute gate really keeps everything under control. And that's also in 1770. So all this combined gating solution is a part of 1770 since a few months, since 2 months actually. That's great. So now let's listen to a couple of audio examples that have been peak normalized and loudness normalized. So that's a short sequence of 1.5 minutes or 2 minutes, and the first is normalized to minus 9 dBFS sample peak, and then we'll hear the same sequence, loudness normalized to minus 23. So first sequence, peak normalization.
Tweak that a little bit.
I was wondering if it was his...
Look where he's ended up on the downslope. He's got to just flip it across there and grow some breaks.
I wondered if it was his lucky hole-in-one forearm that he was using there. It may well have been. But it's going to be a very difficult third shot. Advantage to Furyk there, trying to fight back.
Hoe lang weet je dat? Hoe ver zijn eigenlijk? Ja, maar ja, dat is belangrijk, hè. Er staat een limiet op tot wanneer je dat nog kunt wegdoen, hè.
Hoe is dat zo simpel dan?
Ja, dat is redelijk simpel. We gaan deze discussie niet opnieuw voeren, hè. Hier hebben we het toch al lang over gehad.
Ik wil dat echt niet wegdoen.
Sta ferma. Chaque observateur pose un regard personnel en fonction de ce qu'il est. Le fermier ne voit ici qu'un danger pour sa récolte, les deux passionnés parlent d'amour. Chacun s'installe dans sa propre vision du paradis ou de l'enfer. Si on change d'observateur, la réalité se transforme. Chacun va piller le réel en fonction de son vécu.
Ich hatte mein Zelt, als noch alle schliefen, verlassen. Nicht fern vom Lager fand ich, wonach wir suchten. Die Oase.
Heeft u daar wel eens bij stilgestaan? Nee? Wij wel. De Amersfoortse, de inkomensverzekeraar van ondernemend Nederland.
So you see, a couple of examples work seemingly okay. A couple are totally, out of control, like the last short commercial, which is highly compressed and therefore, of course, much louder. Yeah. These were, by the way, examples that we used for our gating tests. So the first parts were sometimes very dynamic documentaries or music. So if they are, have a similar loudness range and similar peak to loudness ratio, then they also work in peak normalization mode reasonably well. But others don't, like the compressed stuff. So let's listen to the same sequence now, loudness normalized to -23 with the gate. Yeah.
Tweak that a little bit.
I was wondering if it was his...
Look where he's ended up on the downslope. He's got to just flip it across there and grow some breaks.
I wondered if it was this lucky hole-in-one forearm that he was using there. It may well have been. But it's going to be a very difficult third shot. Advantage to Furyk there, trying to fight back.
Hoe lang weet je dat? Hoe ver zijn je eigenlijk? Ja, maar ja, dat is belangrijk, hè. Er staat een limiet op tot wanneer je dat nog kunt wegdoen, hè.
Waarom is dat zo simpel dan?
Ja, dat is redelijk simpel. We gaan deze discussie niet opnieuw voeren, hè. Hier hebben we het toch al lang over gehad.
Ik wil dat echt niet wegdoen.
Sta ferma. Accidenti. Chaque observateur pose un regard personnel en fonction de ce qu'il est. Le fermier ne voit ici qu'un danger pour sa récolte, les deux passionnés parlent d'amour. Chacun s'installe dans sa propre vision du paradis ou de l'enfer. Si on change d'observateur, la réalité se transforme. Chacun va piller le réel en fonction de son vécu.
Ich hatte mein Zelt, als noch alle schliefen, verlassen. Nicht fern vom Lager fand ich, wonach wir suchten. Die Oase.
Heeft u daar wel eens bij stilgestaan? Nee? Wij wel. De Amersfoortse, de inkomensverzekeraar van ondernemend Nederland.
So well, it might not be perfect, but that's not possible, as we know now. But at least it's already much better. And you also see dynamic stuff wins, highly compressed stuff loses in a way. So the last commercial, when the loudness advantage goes away, you only recognize, you know, the overcompression and the bad quality, all the background sound that has been pumped up by the compressor, whatever. Yeah. So that's also a good thing, that, you know, overcompression gets punished with loudness normalization. So actually, advertisement companies can really think about now new ways to attract attention. They should, because the loudness advantage is going away. And we also take away the fear from the advertisement companies that they are softer in level than the competitor, because everything is loudness normalized to the very same level. So there is this eternal fear of a commercial advertisement company. My spot has to be up there because otherwise I'm lower than the Coca-Cola commercial or whatever. We're taking that fear away. And now they can think about new ways, more dynamic ways to attract attention. So that's one other very important thing, that with a technical revolution or technical recommendation, we actually inspire creativity or new ways to craft your program. So it has a direct influence on the artist side. I think that's great too. That's really cool. So we are, you know, already quite near on our balance situation, in that case yin-yang. And what do you think, Sylvia, about that? Yeah, okay, quietness is even better, yeah, sometimes, but okay, yeah. You seem to be reasonably fine with that, at least. We have another parameter in R128 that I've talked to you about, and let's just briefly remain a couple of minutes with loudness range. And that is based on a statistical measure. I've talked about that yesterday, so you know it already. It's based on the distribution of loudness levels, excluding the extremes, so that not this one gunshot that we heard in this excerpt of No Country for Old Men would bias the loudness range measurement. And TC Electronic, as you know, has developed that algorithm and gave it to EBU as an open standard. So here you've seen that yesterday too, an example of the Matrix, yeah, a movie you all know, with two prominent, you know, humps here. Here is the statistical density. So you have, here is all the dialogue, here are most of the action scenes, and loudness range now anticipates the distance between the average soft and the average loud parts of a signal. So loudness range would, in that case, in the matrix, be that kind of region and area, and for the matrix it's 25, and we measure it in LU. So 25 LU is, for instance, loudness range for that. And we now can use that measure too for many purposes, to just, for instance, decide whether we need to do some dynamic treatment to our signal because it's just too dynamic for the living room. Or we can also use it to, you know, purpose our whole program, our whole channel for different distribution platforms. If it's for podcasting or internet streaming, we can say, okay, we only allow a loudness range of 10 LU, for instance, because 25, 20 LU, whatever, will never fit into that kind of distribution platform. And we also can check, just a second, we also can check whether something has been done to our audio signal through a chain. Because if we measure loudness range at the input and loudness range at the output, and they are not the same, something has happened on the way. That's also a nice way to use this parameter. So, accordingly, because there is no one limit for different genres or different distribution platforms, we do not define a maximum in R128. We just say, please use this parameter, use loudness range, to determine whether you should do something to your audio or for the specific platform that you are transmitting. We do define a maximum true peak level, nevertheless, and that is -1, and dB true peak, as you know, is the measure now. It's dBFS measured with a true peak meter. And it's important to say that this is for generic PCM material. Yeah. So if you think about transmitting then in a bitrate coded system like AC3 or high efficiency AAC or whatever, then we recommend a lower true peak level, because these codecs need more headroom, as Thomas certainly has also elaborated, I would guess, yesterday. Yeah. Good. So -1 true peak for generic PCM material is our maximum true peak level. Why not 0? Because the oversampling measurement still has a kind of uncertainty or a possible error due to the fact that the oversampling frequency will not be endlessly high. So therefore we go back 1 dB, yeah, -1. Okay, let's just talk about metering side a little bit, you know, not too much. We have something called the EBU mode, which defines the kind of framework of a loudness meter, and that proved to be highly successful, I have to say. Not only, or one of the reasons why it was so successful is that we had all the manufacturers, the relevant manufacturers, in the group. So RTW, TC Electronic, what have you, DK Technologies, they are all parts of the group. So they, together with us, crafted this EBU mode. So they cannot complain afterwards, why did you do that? Because they already did it. Yeah. So it was very easy for them to issue compliant meters because they worked actually defining the framework of EBU mode. So that was a very good and a very, a very nice example of users and manufacturers working together to create this EBU mode that we have now. And there are loads of meters already out on the market, and there's almost every week or every second week there's a new EBU mode compliant meter coming to the market. Yeah, it's really taking off big time now. So what is at the heart of EBU mode? We have 3 different integration times: momentary, short-term, and integrated. Momentary is a 400 millisecond integration time, no gate, because I always want to know what is my loudness level now. Yeah, and the gate shouldn't play a role. I want to know if my loudness level is now minus 50 LUFS right now. So that's what I would use for my immediate kind of leveling as a mixer. Also short term. Short term is already moving a little bit slower because it is 3 seconds integration time, but still no gate because I also want to know if it's a very low in level. So the only measurement that has the gate is this integrated one, which is from start to stop. Yeah. That's where the gate is useful. Yeah, I've elaborated on that. That's the only measure with the gate. So these 3 integration times are at the heart of EBU mode, and every EBU mode meter has to be able to display, not all of them at the same time, but has to be able to display them. Yeah. Good. Scale and range. We have a few variations here. This is, for instance, the scale with a relative display, so with 0 LU as the reference. And that's, I think, psychologically interesting, because for unexperienced operators, they like the 0. They like 0, and they like it to be at almost the same position that they have been used to in the QPPM area. So what we can do is just secretly during the night exchange the QPPM to a loudness meter and tell them, you 0, that's okay, yeah, you still keep 0. And behind it, of course, is minus 23 LUFS. So 0 LU in an EBU mode meter has to be minus 23 LUFS. That's also one of the applications of the relative measure LU. Yeah? And now the video editors, when they have a very dynamic interview and then a highly compressed music, they now see on the meter that the highly compressed music is 10 LU too loud, whereas the peak level would be the same. So I've always had this experience that I get stuff from the edit room and music after a dynamic interview is just way too loud. And I tell them, why did you do that? And they say, well, yeah, I've leveled it to 0. Yeah? Okay, but now if they level it to 0, it's going to be fine. Because now they have a meter where they actually see what they should hear. Anyway, this is the scale where we have 9 LU above the 0, which is called then the EBU plus 9 scale. And then we have another one for more dynamic material, which is just double the range, which we call the EBU plus 18 scale. Yeah, very easy. And of course, we also want to see absolute values if we want to. So you have to be able to switch it to absolute mode 2, where you have minus 23 here. Yeah. But the power of 0, I think, is a big one. So I think especially for inexperienced operators, we will have the 0. Okay? So 1 to 8, those are numbers that I'm very happy with too, because I use them for the logo. And I see Mauro with a T-shirt with the logo. It's unbelievable. So I took the EBU colors, a little bit of warping, a little bit of rearranging, and we have the happy, smiling face. So that's our logo for all our loudness work. And it's on the cover of every of our documents. And it's not only a joke, but manufacturers can actually use the logo to indicate compliance with EBU mode, which manufacturers do. Yeah, they use that. So that's nice. So a smiling face. Okay, Silvio? Ah, yeah, okay, you don't smile. Damn it. Yeah, he's always grumpy, you know, it's really bad. All right, let's summarize. Let's find our strategy for the way to loudness nirvana. So one of the foremost results of that of all that work is that it's good to use and trust your ears again. Yeah? They are the best loudness meters. So use and trust your ears. And we're back to that. That's really cool. That's really nice. Dynamics and contrast are rewarded. Contrast is something that is essential to every art form. When there is no contrast, it's boring, you know. In painting, in music, in sculpture, whatever, contrast is at the essence of every art form. So if you have a picture like that, it's boring. There's no contrast at all. But with contrast, it's nice. Or this one, boring. Contrast, yeah. We have black and white, we have quiet and loud, we have all these things. Contrast is important, and with loudness normalization, contrast and dynamics are rewarded again. Loudness normalization is the key to this, and it's happening now. So it's not a question of, yeah, maybe it comes in 5 years. It's happening now. So for you, you have to decide whether you stay out of the game or not, because it is happening. Yeah. So I'm very confident now that we are really changing the world now. There is no turning back, in my opinion, now. There's a lot of really encouraging signs that this is going to happen now. Yeah? So you really should become the Zen master in your facility of loudness. Okay? Because Zen, as you see here in the Japanese garden, has all those concepts of contrast, of simplicity, of restraint, you know, not overloading things, naturalness, all these things. That is all applicable to our concept here too. At the heart, loudness, that's and not peak, that's the center. We're in the middle of a revolution, so on the way, dramatic drum roll, to a better world. So we have this chance now. When in your life as a professional do you really have the chance to change the world? And we have it now. We really have it now to have happy consumers, at least as far as, you know, the technical side of things is concerned. So we should be really smiling. You too, Silvio, you should smile. Yeah, really. You should do that. But he's just too grumpy. But I think I can manage. I promised you that fly, so you smile. Yeah, really. Okay, yeah, okay. Okay. He does it finally, you know. Finally he does it. So one loudness standard and one open loudness standard without proprietary technology. That's also important, yeah. There's no proprietary technology involved. For everybody, for the whole production chain. So production, distribution, transmission, to the very end, to the consumer. So that's great. So now Silvio can get his fly, finally. Yeah? But actually, I think I would more like him to have him swallow the remote control. So maybe we'll have that one, yeah. Anyway, thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.